Almost you are good to go.
A very good evening, everyone. Welcome to MRI's webinar on post-COVID recoveries. We all are in too much doubt that what is going to happen uh, in our economy. People are saying that we will see a V-shaped recovery, but we don't know. There are too many FDIs inflow in the country, but we are not clear whether this FDIs are for the long-term investment or it will go away or it will vanish in some time. To clear all our doubts, we have the eminent speakers today. But first of all, I would request our president, Mr. Sanjay Mehta, to give introduction of MRI and take it ahead. Yeah, Sanjay Mehta.
Thank you, Amar. Hi, this is Sanjay Mehta from MRI, President. I welcome Shri Nilesh Shah from Kotak Mahindra Asset Management, President and MD of Kotak Mahindra Asset Management. Edward Mahirar from ED&F Man Capital Markets from USA, and Priyanka Javiriji, VP Kotak Securities Limited. I would also request first Mr. Sufyan to introduce them with our MRI video. Can you start MRI video first, Sufyan?
MRAI is the apex association of India, representing the voice of the Indian recycling industry, with a vision to promote responsible recycling in the country. MRAI was established in the year 2011 as Metal Recycling Association of India, with a focus on secondary ferrous and non-ferrous metals. However, over the years, MRAI has expanded its reach to include other recyclables such as plastic, paper, e-waste, tire and rubber, glass, automobiles, etc. The name of the association has since been changed to reflect the same, and today Material Recycling Association of India has a collective strength of more than 1,200 members, representing various recyclable commodities and comprising over 20,000 small, medium and large enterprises, directly and indirectly employing 25 lakh people. Recycling has multifold benefits beyond just saving landfill acreage. To list a few, it replaces the need and dependence on finite virgin materials such as iron ore and bauxite and increases the resource security of the nation. Use of recycling processes consumes less energy and water and reduces greenhouse gas emissions when compared to primary processes that use virgin ores. Recycling generates 6 times as many jobs as just waste management practices. Recycling is a pan-India activity employing people from all backgrounds, including women and low-skilled labor. Recycling industry requires less capital investment, has a lower gestation period, and can be set up close to generation and consumption points. MRAI is officially recognized by the Government of India, and it regularly interacts with various departments at a local, state and national level. MRAI has worked with many government ministries on different policies and studies related to recycling, such as the Draft National Material Recycling Policy, Niti Aayog, Steel Scrap Policy, Ministry of Steel, End-of-Life Vehicle Recycling Policy, Ministry of Road Transport and Highway, Resource Efficiency Policy, MOEF, Study on Ferrous Market in India, JPC, Study on Aluminium Market in India, Ministry of Mines, and many more. Our industry contributed to the government's Swachh Bharat, Make in India campaigns and policy of Plastic Park. India's recycling rate at a meager 20% is well below global averages. We all need to collectively work hard to promote recycling as a sustainable business model. MRAI's vision is to work alongside industry and government and help create advanced infrastructure and right policies which could push the recycling rate above 50% in next 5 years. The world is working towards zero waste policies and circular economy concepts. India cannot afford to be left behind. The trade and free flow of recyclables must also be promoted so that Indian consumers and manufacturers continue to have access to environmental friendly and competitive resources and raw materials. We strongly believe that scrap is a mine above earth, and any wastage of scrap or impediments in recycling is a crime against future generations. From this platform, we would like to thank all our members for their long-term association with MRAI. We invite all of you to continue on this journey with us as we work towards making India a global recycling and manufacturing hub with sustainable growth. MRAI, Material Recycling Association of India, the voice of the Indian recycling industry.
Thank you, Sufyan, for a beautiful video presentation of MRAI. What is MRAI and what we are doing? I'm sure my speakers must have had now knowledge of what MRAI is doing in India and the international market. Our share of business in total metal productions in India is above 50%. If you take the example of steel, we are 55%. In aluminium, we are 30%. In lead, we are 80%. Like that, in every metals, we are having share of business more than 20% to 80%. So overall, we are making our metals through scrap route. There are two ways of producing metals. One is iron ore or bauxite or copper concentrate, and one is through using scrap worldwide. So we are interacting with government from last 10 years, having a membership of more than 1,200 and 2.5 million people we are employing at our factories of 20,000 units all across India. And we have participated in a lot of many policies on draft policy made by the government of India. Many policies are still in the pipeline, like end of life vehicle, scrap recycling policy by NITI Aayog. Like that, many policies are already in the pipeline to release by the government. I will request my moderator, Mr. Dhaval Shah, VP, and my Secretary General, Mr. Amar Singh, to take it forward this webinar. I kindly listen them carefully, all my participants. I request everyone to take full interest to provide you best knowledge from the MRAI. Thank you very much, Amar and Dhaval.
Thank you so much, Sanjay. Now I would like to welcome Mr. Nilesh Shah, but this would not have been possible without the support of Mr. Vikas Agrawal or of AIF and PMS advisors. With his support only, we were able to invite Mr. Nilesh Shah. I'll just give you a brief background about Mr. Nilesh Shah. Mr. Nilesh Shah, to me, is one of the best speakers on overall economy. If any person in this entire country can give the economic definitions or can elaborate more about the economic condition, he is the person who can simply, in a very simple way, he can give the description. So Mr. Nilesh Shah is the Group President and Managing Director of Kotak Mahindra Asset Management Company. He is having an experience of more than 25 years in the capital markets. And Mr. Nilesh Shah is one of the gold medalists of from Institute of Chartered Accountants of India. I would request Mr. Nilesh Shah to please come and guide us that how economy is going to go ahead in next 5 years. You're welcome, sir.
Hi, thank you, Amar. Very good evening to everyone. Thank you for those kind words of introduction, and I'll try to present India's economic picture in a short possible time. I also have my colleague Pankaj Tibrewal who will talk specifically about sectors like auto, infra, and secondary metal. Undoubtedly, Indian economy, like global economy, is going through one of the toughest phases. This is the perfect storm. There was a medical crisis which stopped economic activities and created economic crisis, and both of them combined created financial crisis. This is na bhuto na bhavishyati event. We haven't seen anything like this in the past. We can only pray to the God that we don't see anything like this in the future. While all of you are going through the tough grind, let me only talk positives about the economy and the benefits of the current situation. I'll give you an example of two tiles company which I observed in last 4 months. The first tile company in the month of March was launching an advertising campaign. They shut down their advertising campaign immediately with the lockdown. They renegotiated rental agreements for their shops all over the country. They cut salaries at various levels. They diverted their export cargo to rural and semi-urban market, which was not impacted by COVID-19. They shifted some of the burden to vendors, both on the supplier side as well as stockist side. Net-net, in this last 5 months, they worked tirelessly to lower the cost. Their peers have also done similar thing, but the intensity is vastly different. Whereas the first company was able to lower fixed cost by 35 to 40%, others have just done to the extent of 15 to 20%. So my recommendation to all the members of MRAI will be, please focus on cost, cut cost brutally. This lowering of your operating leverage will determine whether you will be able to survive the downturn or not. Second, compared to many other parts of the world, India has far better opportunity to overcome this crisis. Our fatality rate is low. Bombay and Delhi both have shown that we can control this disease even in a dense cluster like Dharavi or equivalent in Delhi. So everything is not lost. Soon we will have medical solution, vaccine, and the effect of social distancing and mask wearing and public hygiene will ensure that there will be life beyond corona. From an economic point of view, the Reserve Bank of India has betted like Rohit Sharma, hitting every ball for a 4 or a 6. They have pumped liquidity in banking system in an unprecedented manner. Never ever in the history of India we have seen central bank releasing so much liquidity. They have cut policy rates at repo level. They have intervened in the markets like currency, like debt to stabilize. Net-net RBI is there to support the economy. Now, despite heroic efforts by RBI, there are certain gaps which they are trying to correct. One is the borrowing cost faced by the borrower. Clearly, there is a need to lower interest burden on borrowers, and which is where Government of India came out with 3 lakh crore MSME funding credit guarantee scheme facility and about 75,000 crore NBFC credit guarantee scheme. Both these schemes, when it will become operational, will improve the credit flow in economy. You can be rest assured that today RBI will leave no stone unturned to lower policy rates, to improve credit transmission, to provide liquidity to banking system, and to ensure that India's currency market and bond market functions normally. The government also has taken lots of steps. While we are a large country and there are always some misses here and there, by and large, we have done extremely well. Now, going forward, can we do some more things which can change India's growth orbit? Answer is yes. The first growth orbit will change when we go and become part of global supply chain management. In 1980, India and China were of similar size. China today is 5 times bigger than us because they become manufacturer to the world. From safety pin to spaceship, they are able to manufacture everything. In India's case, we caught the bandwagon of IT sector and became back office to the world, but our factories were not globally comparable. Now the world is looking at China with suspicion. They think they didn't act properly on Wuhan virus. They are worried about their border disputes and military adventures. Clearly, many companies want to move out of China. Now there is severe competition. Cambodia, Thailand, Indonesia, Malaysia, Mexico, everyone wants to attract those companies. Their infrastructure is better than India. Their policy making is better than India. We have to compete with them and bring all these companies out of China to India. What we didn't do in 1980, we have opportunity to catch up in 2020. The one big advantage which India has, all our competitors put together does not have 136 crore people market. We have 136 crore consumers. If we can leverage that and bring those companies out of China to India, there could be great opportunity and becoming supply chain part. I'll leave you with one example. Obviously, we have to replace red tape with red carpet to attract these FPIs, to attract these companies. But there was one company called Vestas, which makes wind turbines. They set up their factory in China in 18 months. When they came to India, they wanted to outperform that. And touch wood, their Indian factory started operating on 15th month. While this is an exception rather than rule, but if we follow the same pattern in welcoming companies out of China to India and giving them red carpet, growth of India will change significantly. The second thing which government can do is related to, let's say, bringing unutilized resources, unutilized assets into main economy. The way you do recycling of waste and scrap, the government also must recycle its unutilized assets. Today, when activity levels are down, onus is on the government to spend money and keep the activity running. In US, UK, Japan, Europe, governments have announced trillions of dollars of packages. Compared to that, our package announcement is smaller. We must provide support to sectors like hotels, tourism, aviation, construction, real estate, which has been hit very badly by COVID-19. Now, if government tries to spend money by borrowing, that will pull interest rates up. So they must find some other way of raising resources. There are two ways in which government can raise resources. One is by taxes, other is by monetization of assets. If you raise taxes in today's time, it will be futile, it will boomerang. That means government must monetize other assets. What are these assets? We have custodian of enemy property. In that, there are 9,400 properties valued at roughly about 1 lakh crore. These properties are lying on the balance sheet of government for last 7 decades. Why don't we monetize those assets, sell those real estate, and put that money into spending? There are so many assets of government lying all over the place, which, if liquidated appropriately, will significantly benefit our economy at this point of time. The second thing is related to the biggest problem of India, which is its gold assets. In last 21 years, we have spent $376 billion for import of gold. If you take gold smuggling and other, that amount could be $500 billion. Now this money is lying in Tijori. Can we bring this gold out of Tijori into bank accounts, into white economy, so that slowly and steadily our investment grows, tax collection grows, and there is more money in the system? Today, no other country has so many options like India has. If we take advantage of opportunities, there is far better days ahead after COVID-19. The world will look to invest in India. Our entrepreneurs need to be given red carpet rather than red tape so that they can capitalize these opportunities. In the foreign exchange crisis, when liberalization came in 1990s, we created IT and tech industry. My feeling is that post COVID-19, we will see similar growth in manufacturing industry, and that will pull India's economy towards $5 trillion. Post COVID-19, companies which survive the downturn will have huge opportunity. They'll do well, and please keep faith, cut costs, survive the downturn, and wait for good days to come back so that you can cover up on all the opportunities or time lost. I will now request my colleague Pankaj Tibrewal to talk about automotive, infra, and secondary metal sector.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Nilesh bhai. Good evening to everybody. Before going into these three sectors, I think it's very important to give a flavor of what we are seeing on the ground and where do we think over the next 4-5 years the key themes will work. And Nilesh touched upon the China's supply chain disruption, and I think we should not underestimate this disruption which is happening not only in India but globally. And it's very important to get a sense what's happening by the government out here. Friends, after a long time, we are seeing this government using the word competitive many times in the last few months. And speaking to many entrepreneurs across sectors, for the first time after 6 years, we are seeing that government is acting pro-business. And there's a lot of things being done to make sure that the economic growth catapults to the next orbit. Let me take you the most important theme, which is the China substitution story. And in that, we have seen a lot of movement happening in few sectors. The first sector we should, kind of see where real demand momentum is there, which is extremely strong. And we have moved couple of percentage points in our global market share in a large industry called specialty chemicals and other chemicals. And clearly, when we speak to the global agrochemical and pharma guys, every company is looking to incrementally shift a part of their supply chain to Indian companies where they are completely assured that the molecule secrecy, the integrity, and the execution will be taken care of. And hence, you have seen over the last 2-3 years, many companies have grown at a CAGR of 30 to 40%. Not only on their top line, but also on their bottom line. And the demand outlook for them continues to be extremely healthy. And friends, this is a $1 trillion plus industry, the global chemicals. China occupies more than 30% market share. We have moved from 2% to almost 4.5-5% market share in the last couple of years. And I think we have just scratched the surface. But this change is for real and is happening in front of us. The second sector probably where the ecosystem has started to develop, and it was a point of worry for the government that after after oil and gold, electronics had become a very important component of imports. We were roughly importing $50 billion worth of electronics. And I don't know how many of you have noticed, recently government introduced a PLI scheme, which is the production linked incentive scheme. Friends, we think it's a game changer. Earlier government was giving incentive for exports directly, which we lost last year on WTO. So directly you can't incentivize. And hence you launched a PLI scheme where mobile is the first sector where you have invited licenses, application, and 24 companies have applied for PLI license in India. Our sense is that today India consumes about 15 crore smartphones and roughly equal amount of feature phones. And over the next 3-4 years, our sense is that from 30 crore today, what we assemble and manufacture in India, we could easily move to 70-80 crore mobile phone manufacturing assembly. The value add today is just 14-15%, and that value add probably over the next 3-4 years could move to 35%. Today, everything is imported, right from camera module, display, motors, everything. Probably once the ecosystem and the scale starts coming in, you will see that happening. And government is giving a 4 to 6% incentive. And whichever entrepreneurs we are speaking to in this ecosystem of electronics, everybody is excited with this new thought of the government. Similar thing we are seeing in across sectors like APIs. Today, we import about almost 20,000 crore worth of APIs from China itself. And there's a huge focus that not only formulation, we should be backwardly integrated to APIs. And you saw that post-COVID, we became the world's pharmacy. We supplied medicine all across the world. And India, in its true form, had a made in India medicine, which was supplied to all over the world. And government's focus is that we should backwardly integrate. Today, all the vitamins, vitamin B12, B6, everything is imported on the API front from China. And our sense is, speaking to a lot of pharma guys, that this is probably the start. And they have also introduced PLI in the APIs and medical devices to start with. They have, on the similar lines, identified 12 such sectors where they want to have domestic champions, where they want to have competitiveness compared to China. And the common thing was given was power cost is high in India, logistic cost is high, credit cost is high. So how, despite of all these problems, how can we move and compete with China? I think COVID came as a reason where world hatred has started. And probably India is looking this as an opportunity and hand-holding most of the industries. For example, in mobile, they are giving 4 to 6% incentive, which is huge for an OEM manufacturer of mobile. Similarly, in API, it's a large incentive for a company to set up operations or a backward integration plant, and government will handhold it. The idea is to handhold a toddler, make him a teenager so that he can take care of and compete in the global environment. And I think it's a brilliant move. And I think over the next 3, 4, 5 years, if we execute it well, many of the sectors will probably lead the way, which we probably have not thought about. Let me give you a small example how the China substitution story is playing out. One is on tiles. Morbi is the largest cluster of tiles, and you will all be surprised this year. Morbi will export 14,000 crore worth of tiles out of India, and it's not only to Middle East, it's also to US. In US, we had just 1% market share, and as we speak today, we have moved to 7% market share in the total import of tiles in US. And China used to be the big daddy, and they have slipped in terms of market share there. And you speak to any Morbi guy, he says we were doing 3 containers to US, now we are doing 18 containers every month to US. So that's a 5 to 6x jump, which is happening because a lot of anti-dumping duty, trade tensions, and the geopolitical landscape, which has changed. Similarly, comparing to small examples like a mattress company, They are talking about their export revenue today is 20 crores, but US being the largest market for mattress in the world, and a large part was dependent on import from China, they are saying that even if we convert 10% of the inquiries we are getting from US, this 20 crores cumulatively can become 600 crores over the next 2-3 years. So after a long time, at least on the bottom up level, in many industries, we are seeing some optimism coming across, where entrepreneurs feel that there are right incentives, right policy making, which has started to come. But there's always a if, that on the execution side, what we do. But this is quite a big theme. Coming to automotive on that side, I think we traveled that journey in the 90s when Maruti became competitive. And we all will agree that we started with the indigenization of 15, 20, 25%. Now, most of the OEMs are 60 to 70% indigenized in the country. But still, you all will be surprised to know that we import more than 1,30,000 crore of auto components from global countries. And from China, the number is about 35,000 crores of auto component, which is still imported, which is suspension, cooling products, electronics, and so on and so forth. I think the next thought process is how to make sure that the auto ancillary industry in India also becomes far more competitive. We should not be dependent. Even a lakh crore is a large amount in terms of 15-20 billion dollars worth of imports, and how we become competitive to become the global hub for auto manufacturing and auto component in the country. And I think that's a very, very large number the government is targeting at. So I think this industry probably will see more indigenization happening. So that's one theme where we believe that over the next 3, 4, 5 years, there's a large opportunity sitting across sectors. It is in textiles also, it is in furniture manufacturing, it is in toys, it is in garmenting, it is in footwear, and APIs, pharma, electronic manufacturing, a large part of these which are dependent on China. That's one theme. The second thing we believe is that companies who have a strong balance sheet and cash flows are becoming stronger. And the trend of formalization of economy, which we saw post demonetization, then GST, and now post COVID has accelerated further. We are seeing that companies and in every sector, the top 4, 5, 7, 10 guys are becoming stronger and stronger, and every sector is seeing consolidation, whether it be real estate, whether it be cement, whether it be telecom, whether it be pipes, whether it be steel making, whether it be aviation. So I think everywhere we are seeing consolidation, and the big theme out here in the next 3 to 5 years is that stronger will become or emerge stronger post-COVID. The third theme which we believe in the near term is working out very strongly is the fact that India is moving towards, or this year, Bharat will do better than India. And that means rural is showing signs of promise and showing signs of a lot of traction. And urban, as the cities and unlocking happens, will probably, kind of move forward. The fourth theme, I think, is the real economy. I think for the last 8-9 years, because manufacturing not picking up, the real economy in a way has struggled, whether it be real estate, whether it be industrials, whether it be manufacturing, construction. And friends, after a long time, the cost of capital has started coming down, and which is a big, catalyst for construction and real estate to start picking up at some point of time. The home loan rates today are at decadal low, and if you adjust for the tax benefit, we are talking about 6.2, 6.3% home loan rate. And that number, if you look at the rental yield today, is just the gap is now 3%, which used to be 6-7%. I think at some point of time, if real estate starts picking up, which probably will be sometime next year, before that you will see some bloodbath post moratorium getting over. And I think if real estate start picking up, the 200 industries along with real estates also start seeing traction again. So I think real economy, which has, or the sectors relating to real economy, which has been battered over the last few years, probably start seeing some traction going forward and help in shaping our economy over the next 3 to 5 years. These four broadly are the themes where we believe if one looks from an investment perspective, probably a lot of wealth creation is waiting to happen. And we need to go bottom up and pick the right companies in the sectors. Also coming to metals, I think we have seen a very interesting trend in metal. For the first time when lockdown happened and there was no domestic demand, the steel companies did exceedingly well. And the surprise factor was that 80% of the finished product of most of the steel companies was actually exported out. And this came as a surprise to many of them. The order books for steel companies for the next few months also looks very, very strong, as we have a great export demand led by China and some of the other countries which have come back to the pre-COVID levels. Also on the steel side, we are seeing the users of steel, which are pipes, also are seeing consolidation, and many of them probably are becoming stronger and stronger. So on the metal side, we believe that consolidation has played out over the last 4-5 years. Now 4-5 guys in the steel sector commands the lion's market share, same as in other metals, whether it be aluminum, zinc, copper, and after a long time, government is realizing that coal, we have the largest reserves of coal mine in the world, and still we are importing coal. And with this privatization of coal mine happening, I believe there is a lot of interest. It may take some time, but over the next 3 to 5 years, I am very hopeful that the coal mining sector would see a lot of traction, which in turn will lead to a lot of demand for construction equipments, explosives, and so on and so forth. So I think what this COVID has done, it has accelerated some of the policy which we were all expecting for last many years. And I think if we can execute it well across defense, across chemicals, across APIs, across different manufacturing verticals which I spoke about, I think we could look at a environment where manufacturing probably will be a mega trend for this decade, which we all have been expecting for the last 2 decades. And friends, services will only take our economy to a point. Services will only thrive when manufacturing comes in. And if really manufacturing picks up and government means what it is doing and saying, I think we have a decent future lying ahead of us. And there's a lot of interest by global guys to set up shop in India. And we have seen that over the last few quarters. So with this, I think I'll stop on the themes part and hand it over to Nilesh sir for the rest of the comments.
We'll take question answers after the end of the presentation, right, Amar?
Right, sir. Absolutely right. Yeah.
Perfect.
So now, as we have heard that from Mr. Nilesh, that Indian economy is going to boost in next 5 years, and the overall economic performance in terms of automobile industry, infrastructure industry, real estate industry, if the liquidity is proper, then we can really make most out of it. So going ahead, we will now request Mr. Edward Mayor to present the metals outlook. What will the metals outlook in next 2 years? Mr. Mayor is one of the most accurate price forecaster for LME based metals in last 4 years. It is 2011, 2014, 15, and 18, and finished second in 2013 as ranked by Metal Bulletin, a leading metal trade publication. He joined international finance brokerage firm ADNF Man Capital Market as a senior commodity independent consultant. Prior to becoming involved in research full time, Mr. Mayor sourced non-ferrous metal out of Europe, China, Russia for a number of US clients for more than a decade. Utilizing the practical and physical trading experience he has gained while working with UK-based Transworld Metal. Ismail, the stage is yours. You can go ahead.
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me.
Yeah.
Yes, very good. And I hope you can see my screen.
Yes. Go
Oh,
ahead.
wonderful. Well, thank you very much to the MRAI to have me. Thank you, Sanjay, for inviting me. This is the first time I'm addressing your association, and I look forward to an in-person meeting one of these days, like we all are. I kind of share your optimism from the various speakers we are listening to about things going forward. Certainly, India has a lot of promise. It's well poised to be sort of ahead right now in terms of the geopolitics and what else is going on. But I just thought for our purposes, we could give you an idea of where we see metals are going. I will start with just sort of a year-to-date performance. This is up to the first half of the year. As you can see, it's kind of been a mixed picture all over the place. The last 2 months or so, we've seen a nice move up in many of these metals, and which I think will continue to be the case maybe by the end of this year into next year, and we'll discuss that a little further. But as you know, things have been very difficult for the global economy at large, with a big implosion in PMI output, industrial production readings. In fact, the second quarter was the trough.
Edward, sorry, sorry to interrupt you. Can you put your the presentation on presentation mode?
Presentation mode?
Yeah.
Which is, let me see. Presentation mode.
No problem, so go ahead, not an issue. The fourth icon on the last.
Hold on.
On your right hand side? Near zoom button in the last, in the
Presenter. Is that
in the end of your slide?
Is that it? Is that it? Okay, can you hear me now? Can you see everything? No? Oh.
Mr. Edward, you can continue with the presentation.
Okay, very good. Continuing on, this was just a little bit of history as to where we were. Big implosion in industrial production output. None of this is new to you. China is something we look at obviously very closely in terms of metals prices. The data we've been getting lately have been improving. As you can see, the PMIs have been rising. Real estate is doing pretty well. Government is lowering rates. They're not spending as much money as they did in 08, 09, but they are instead focusing more on lowering taxes, lowering interest rates, allowing regions to issue more bonds. We're seeing a nice pickup in automotive sales, even in the electric vehicle space. The weak points in China are the export sector, which is about 18% of GDP, and consumer spending. Retail sales are still struggling, and the government is, as I said earlier, is not really spending the massive amounts of monies it was in the past. Having said that, let's see how the imports are running. You could see from copper that we are really booming in terms of inflows in copper. especially refined copper. Concentrates are not coming in as much, and of course scrap is not coming in as much, but I think that will start to change as some of these regulations are put in place. Much to my surprise, the Chinese are even importing steel, believe it or not, and aluminum as well, two commodities that they've never really imported in big quantities before. But it just shows you how quickly the economy has recovered over there, and hopefully the rest of us won't be too far behind. Despite this talk about COVID disruptions, you know, we're hearing a lot of talk about mine disruptions all over the place. Despite all that, we're not seeing any reduction in overall output. Chile, for example, the output is up almost 3% for the first half of the year. Chinese output is basically flat. Peruvian output has gotten hit hard, but it's turning the corner and output is returning back to normal in July. Aluminum and nickel haven't really been hit at all. Zinc a little bit more, but all the 6 base metals we follow are still expected to be in surplus this year, despite these off and on production hiccups. Looking ahead, like all your panelists were saying, much depends on what your coronavirus assumptions are for the second half of the year into next year. Obviously, the world cases are huge. You can see the major economies in the world, apart from China, getting hit hard: India, Europe, US, Brazil. Without these 4 drivers, it's not enough for the Chinese just to do all the heavy lifting. We really need these other regions to also ramp up. And I think they will ramp up once consumers and businesses feel safe and confident enough to start traveling again, to start investing again. I read somewhere that the travel, tourism, and automobile industries are about 30% of global GDP, and all of them have been flat on their back for months now. So without these sectors ramping up, it's going to be very difficult to get growth going again. But I'm an optimist. I think with 150 trials in the works right now, we will see a turn in this crisis. I think that there is about you know, more and more talk of vaccines being circulated, being approved. The Russians, as you know, put out a vaccine which they say is very effective. They haven't really rolled it out for a lot of trials. It's still a relatively small sample, but the WHO is supposed to get the kind of the recipe to see if it's going on. As far as the rest of the year, we think prices will be steady as more of this optimism is discounted. We also have a few uncertainties ahead: the US elections, of course, the US-Chinese trade policies. China, India is something I'm concerned with, and hopefully we won't have a repeat of that incident you had along your border. Taiwan is also something we're watching, but we think that the weaker dollar should be supportive for metals. Next year, I'm much more optimistic. I think there will be a lot of pent-up demand that needs to be accommodated in metals, in growth, and we could see much stronger markets next year that will coincide, hopefully, with renewed growth. And I'm sure India will be part of that. We could send this presentation to you later, but as you can see, our price forecasts for the balance of the year are slightly higher. Copper, we think, will be between 6 to 6.8. There are even numbers of 8,000 for the end of the year. These are the most bullish numbers we're seeing. Aluminum, zinc, lead, all a little bit higher going into the second half of the year. By the way, we would be happy to put any of you on our distribution list. We have a research note that comes out every morning US time and also every evening US time. So please get in touch with me later and I'll be happy to add your name to the list. It was indeed a pleasure talking to all of you, and I hope to meet you in person again, if not earlier. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Edward, for such a nice presentation. Now I would request Ms. Priyanka Zaveri to give a presentation on metals hedging. Ms. Priyanka Zaveri is Assistant Vice President in Kotak Commodities, and having an experience of more than 10 years. Ms. Zaveri, please go ahead.
Hi, good evening, everyone. I need to get a link for my presentation, please.
We have made you the presenter, Priyanka. Go ahead.
Yeah. So yeah, you can see my screen.
Yeah, go ahead. It is working fine. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, Mr. Singh. A very good evening to one and all. It's indeed a pleasure to address this August gathering and sharing the podium with the marquee speakers. My name is Priyanka. I am from Commodity Research Team of Kotak Securities. My topic for the day is commodity price risk management. Now I know this the topic sounds a bit technical, but it's quite simple actually. And in fact, it is what is the need of the hour today. Why do I say that it's the need of the hour? I think right now both the speakers have spoken about how 2020 year has been one of a roller coaster year. We started this year on a positive note, wherein the US-China deal, phase one deal had been clicked and market was getting on its footing. But come February, we saw that there was a pandemic outbreak in China, which eventually, of course, spread across the globe. And that in turn kind of weighed across asset classes. It swayed asset classes majorly towards the downside. Following this, we had central bank coming in and pumping in money. We had fiscal measures. And eventually, with virus cases dwindling down in China, the country got back on its foot. And because of this, again, we saw the asset classes witness a sharp rebound. So one word that I can describe of how the market has behaved is that word would be volatility. We have seen equity markets being volatile. We have seen commodities market being volatile. However, there's just one slight difference between volatility when it happens in equity indices and when it happens with commodities. When it happened in equity markets, say a Reliance share which was trading at 1,000 rupees, when it goes to 2,000 rupees, it actually impacts the people who are dabbling in that share. But that's not the case with what happens in commodities. In commodities, when price moves, when there are sharp gyration in the prices, it starts impacting, or it always has an impact on general public at large. Take example of crude oil. Now, crude oil, when prices were $80, $100, the petrol and diesel that we were consuming was at higher price. When we saw prices dwindle down, we even saw prices go to $20, $10, and for a brief moment, of course, below zero level. It had an impact on the petrol diesel prices that we consumed. So what I'm trying to say is that price gyrations in commodities usually have a larger base that it impacts. And one major sector that gets impacted by this is the businesses that are dealing into these commodities, be it the manufacturers, the importers, the exporters, they all get impacted by commodities. They don't have to actually be trading in commodity markets to get impacted. The gyration in commodity prices starts hitting their bottom line. Let's take an example here of copper wire manufacturer. This year in the month of April, March, April was the time when we saw sharp decline in the prices. Copper in Indian markets was going at around 380, 400 odd rupees. Imagine that is being the time when I am budgeting as a copper wire manufacturer. That's the time I'm budgeting for the whole year. My budgeted copper for the year now is at around 400 rupees. Barely 4 months into the year, the prices have moved from 400 to 500 rupees. We currently operate in a wafer thin margins. Such huge volatility in prices erodes our profit completely. So in such kind of scenarios, is there any way that we can limit the impact of these kind of sharp moves in commodities? That is what my topic is. That is what I intend to explain, and that is why that is what the solution that I am looking forward to share with you. This is just a pictorial representation of what I just said. The gyrations, like I said, in the price, copper I think has been the most volatile this year. We saw prices fall by around 25% by end of March, and now currently, if you look from those lows, prices have bounced back more than 50%. So volatility has been there. We are still not out of the COVID pandemic. The future still looks uncertain, and one thing that can be said for certainty is that this volatility that we have witnessed in past months may persist in coming months also. And how do businesses who are into commodities safeguard their margins, safeguard their bottom line from this, is what my topic is. The solution to limit the impact of commodity price movement on the price on your businesses, the solution is that we are proposing is hedging. Now, let me start with this. What is hedging? To put it in a very simple format, in a very basic layman term, hedging is nothing but a form of insurance. The definition would be, it is something that you do to reduce or control risk. This is done by taking positions in derivatives market, which is equal and opposite to the risk that you are facing in the physical market. We will go through this definition with the help of an example. But first, like I said, hedging is nothing but a form of insurance. Why do you need to hedge? Just the same reason why we take insurance, in order to protect ourselves against adversity. In this case, we do hedging for commodities in order to protect ourselves against adverse price movement of commodities. For some company, it may be to safeguard their profit margins. For some, it would be to protect one's inventory value. So hedging is quite important for businesses dealing into commodities. Basically, there are only two types of hedging. It's a very simple concept. There are only two types of hedging. One is long hedge, another one is short hedge. Long hedge, as the name suggests, it's nothing but going long on the futures exchange with an intention to lock in your raw material prices. While short hedge, again, as the name suggests, it's to sell in the futures market. And here the intention is to lock in the price of your raw material or the finished goods that are lying with you in your warehouse. A simple asset test as to whether you as a company would have to adopt long hedge or short hedge. The simple asset test here is you decide whether the risk to you is the upside risk or the downside. Okay, let's say example, I am worried that copper prices from here on, if it rises, it will be negative for me, or it will have a negative impact on my business. If that is the case, if I'm worried about prices going higher, then what I do is I go for long hedge. While if I'm worried that the prices will fall from here, then the strategy that I should actually be adopting is short hedge. So this is simple definition as to what is hedging, why we need to hedge, and what are the kinds of hedging that are available. I've explained both long and short hedge. What I will now do is let's take an example of both this hedge to understand how the actual payoffs happen in the market. The first case study that I am taking here is that of long hedge. Like I said, in case of long hedge, the risk usually is on the higher side. You are worried that the prices will go higher and it will erode your margins. So let's take this as an example. So here I've taken an example wherein on 1st of April, a company receives an order to make a product out of copper. They require 100 tons of copper for this. And the product that they have decided, they will sell it at 500 rupees. At the time of booking this order, copper prices was going at 400 rupees. So I am decided to sell at 500, copper prices are going at 400. There are additional costs involved to make this product. I have assumed that these costs are around 50 rupees. So my total cost of making 1 kg is 400 rupees worth of copper, 50 rupees worth of extra additional cost. So that's 450, while my selling is already fixed at 500. So my expected profit out of this whole deal is rupees 50 per kg. Okay. The only catch here is the company which has given me the order does not require the product right away. It wants the product 1 month down the line. So there is no point of me going and securing the material right at this point. I will do that say 7-8 days prior to the day I have to deliver. In this case, I have assumed say it is 20th of April. Now, the risk, what happens is on 1st of April, when I booked the copper, when I booked the order, copper was going at only 400 rupees. Now, on 20th April, when I actually go to the physical market to buy the product, there are 2 scenarios that can happen. Actually, there are 3 scenarios that can happen. A, which will be the most ideal one, that is the prices don't move. You get the same price that you fixed at. But looking at the volatility, it's nearly impossible to get the same prices. Second scenario, which is a worse off scenario, is that the prices have actually jumped. They have risen than the price that I have budgeted for. And third scenario is the one that is favoring me, wherein the prices have fallen. In both the scenarios, wherein the prices have risen or prices have fallen, let's see how the payoff actually works off with hedging as well as without hedging. I will first start without hedging. Without hedging, let's look at how it pans out. So on 1st of April, I get a order for 100 tons. I book it at 500 rupees. 20th April, I go to buy the material. Now the copper prices has actually risen to 430 rupees. I don't have an option. Of course, I go ahead and buy it. But now what has happened is my buying price of copper has become 430, while my other cost is 50 rupees. So total expenditure of making the product is 480, while my selling price is 500. So the profit that I earn out of the whole deal is rupees 20, which is far less than what I had predicted while taking this contract, which was of 50 rupees. Now let's see what would have happened if I had gone with if I had selected to hedge. For this example purpose, what I have done is I have assumed that the spot prices and the physical prices are at par. Usually there is a gap, but for this example, what I have done is I'm assuming that the future prices that are trading on exchanges like MCX is at par with what it's trading at the spot market. So the physical leg in with hedging will continue to remain same. There is no change whatsoever. The change or the additional task that comes in is creating futures leg. So when I say creating futures leg is the moment I book my order for 100 tons of copper, at the same point in time, what I will do is I will go and buy 100 tons of copper on MCX. Well, when I'm doing this, because I couldn't do it in physical market, if I do it in physical market, I have to pay the whole price of copper, plus I will have to find a place to store 100 tons of copper. These both are taken care when you trade on futures exchange. On exchanges, the amount that you require to book say 100 tons of copper would be 10% of its value. And since you're not going to take physical delivery, there is no issue of storage. So you have bought copper. Now what you have done is you've gone to the exchange and you have booked copper at 400 rupees. Come 20th April, when you go to the physical market, you see the prices have risen to 430. The moment you buy in physical market, you will square off your position. When I say square off, since you had bought at that on 1st of April, you will sell your positions on MCX on the same date. Now the prices again on MCX also has risen from 400 to 430. So in this, what will happen is you will gain 30 rupees because you had bought at 400 and now you're selling at 430. There is a 30 rupee gain per kg that has to be made on futures leg. This 30 rupees will add on to the profit that you make from your physical leg, which I explained in the earlier one, will be only 20 rupees now. So 20 plus this 30 rupees, total will be 50 rupees. So basically, due to hedging, you will be able to earn your expected amount of profit. In other words, your profit margin is safeguarded. So this was a scenario which is unfavorable to us, which is wherein the prices are rising. Let's take a look at what happens if you have hedged and prices are falling. Now it's second scenario wherein instead of 430, prices of copper actually on 20th April has fallen down to 380. In this case, since my buying price is 380 in physical market, 50 rupees is the price, is the additional cost. My total costing comes to around 430, while my selling price is 500. I make a pool profit of around 70 rupees per kg, which is of course much higher than what I had expected out of the deal when I entered into it of 50 rupees. Okay, but what happens when I'm doing hedging? Whilst doing hedging, now on futures leg, of course, physical leg will continue to remain same. So in future, physical leg, you will make 70 rupees profit. But while you are hedging, what will happen is on MCX, you had bought copper at 400. And on 20th April, while you are buying in the physical market and you go to square off your position, the prices have fallen down by 20 rupees to 380. So I bought at 400. Now I'm forced to sell at 380. So that's a loss of 20 rupees in the futures market right now. This 20 rupees of loss will be offsetted against the physical gain of 70 rupees. Again, the net effect comes to the expected profit, and that is of 50 rupees. The idea of showing you both these scenarios is the whole purpose of doing hedging is really not to make money out of it. The idea of hedging is to safeguard your profit margin, because sitting today, we really don't know whether the prices are going to go up or going to go down. If I was so sure the prices are going to go down, I would really not have gone ahead and hedged. But when you do that, when you start to speculate that the markets are going to go in favor of you, you start to trade in commodities unconsciously. So this is an example of long hedge wherein, be it rising price scenario, be it falling price scenario, if you are hedging, the one thing that is guaranteed for you right from the start is your profit margin will more or less remain stable. So this was an example of long hedge. Now I will take you through an example of short hedge. Short hedge, like I said, this kind of hedging you will ideally do when you are worried the prices are going to fall. This scenario can be when I'm already holding an inventory with me and I'm worried that when I go to sell, I will not get its fair value. Here what I've done is I've taken an example wherein a company already has imported 1,000 tons of aluminium at market price that was going at around 135 rupees per kg. This was on 15th of June. The material is lying with him, with the supplier, with the purchaser. Oh, as and when he gets an order to sell it, he will offload the material, but the price, of course, will be on that day's price, and it is an open price. So let's see again now what can happen in this. I have again taken two scenarios: falling price and rising price. Here, like I said, our risk is downside, so I'll first start with that scenario wherein the prices have actually fallen. So say without hedging, what happens is prices were 135. 1 month down the line, I get the order. Somebody gives me order to take 1,000 tons of aluminium. But of course, I have to give the person the price that is going in the market. At that time, the prices have fallen down to 128. That means I am selling at 128 of material which had costed me or which was lying in my inventory in my warehouse at around 135. That's a loss of 7 rupees per kg of the material of the inventory at my godown. Okay. Now, to counter this, what we propose again is hedging. Like I said, this is an example of short hedge. Basically, it means that you will go ahead and short in the futures market. So again, here, your physical leg will continue to remain the same. The additional task is that of futures leg. Since it is a downside risk, what we do is we go ahead and sell 1,000 tons of aluminium on MCX at current market price. Again, here the assumption is same, that the spot and the physical future markets are at par. So I've sold 1,000 tons of aluminium at 135 rupees. On 18th of July, when I get somebody who is going to buy my material, whatever be the price, in this case, the prices have fallen down to 128. I will go ahead and square off my position, my futures position on MCX. At that time, on 15th of June, I had sold the material. So on 18th of July, I will buy back the material. So now I'm going to buy back at what price? At 128. I'm selling at 135. I'm buying back at 128. I make a gain of 7 rupees. But look at it this way. I lost 7 rupees in physical trade and I'm making 7 rupees in futures. The net effect is that there is no profit, no loss. Basically, I protected my value of my inventory from being eroded. That's the whole idea of creating a short hedge. Similarly, while the prices are rising, same case, if the prices rise from 135 to 140, I make 5 rupees on if I'm not hedging. While with hedging, what will happen is the gain that I make on physical market will be offset by the loss that happens on the futures market, with the final effect being the same, that is no profit, no loss. So the whole idea of giving example of both this hedge and in either of the scenarios is when you are entering into hedging, the idea should be not to make money out of it, but to protect yourself against price movement. How do you get started? Basically, there are just 4 steps. First and foremost is identifying and quantifying the risk that your company has from these commodity prices. Second, basis this, develop a risk management strategy, execute the strategy, and then on a continuous basis, keep on reviewing and revising the strategy. This is the phase wherein we at Kotak Securities can do the hand-holding for you. We will be with you right from step 1. What we ideally do with all the corporates is we sit with them, we have a face-to-face meeting, we study their procurement cycle, we study their selling cycles, what is the basis of their buying. There are quite a few clients who are on monthly average buying. There are quite a few clients who buy on the spot market prices. Some go for quarterly pricing. So we sit and study your procurement cycle. Based on this, we develop a hedge strategy. We decide whether it will be a short hedge, a long hedge, What will be the time frame? When you should be ideally entering, when you should be exiting. That all strategy we help you decide. Of course, once you open up the account with us, your whole futures leg is taken care by our company. We execute these trades for you. Your physical leg, like I said, will continue as it is. There will be no change or no interference from our side on that part. It's only on the futures leg wherein we come into picture. So once we have sat down with you, had a meeting with you, discussed what is the strategy that is need to be adopted. We execute these trades for you, and then of course we sit and revise, we review the strategy, and like I said, it's an ongoing process that happens. So we would, like I said, we would be happy to help any one of you who would be interested in looking at commodity price risk management. We would be happy to meet you one-to-one basis and develop a strategy which is which is relevant to your market or your company. Just lastly, a brief about Kotak Securities. Kotak Securities, as we know, is a more than 2-decade-old company. We are into commodity, currency, and equity broking. We are a subsidiary firm of Kotak Mahindra Bank. We have memberships of BSE, NSE, MSE, and in commodities, we have membership of MCX and NCDX. Our headquarters is based out of Mumbai, but we have pan-India presence. So servicing our clients really would not be an issue. Well, that's all on my part. Thank you all for listening.
Thank you so much, Priyanka, for such a lovely presentation. And you hit the right nail. The biggest thing which is required in our industry is hedging. So, Priyanka, just a small thing. All our members are basically into secondary market, which is scrap business.
Right.
Does your team have any product designs which can help our secondary market members in this hedging thing?
So see, the commodities that are available are, of course, the main materials, as in the refined metals, and not the secondary form, not the scrap form. But I think what we can do is, it doesn't matter whether you are into secondary form or not. I think the price movement that happens in the refined market has a reflection on the secondary market as well. And there may not be a direct correlation, the one I showed in the example, but there is a ratio that can be worked out. So like I said, that would be again a case-to-case basis that we have to study. We have to look at the price mechanism, the procurement mechanism, and then basis that decide a strategy. But as of now, for secondary material per se, we don't have we don't have any other product. The products that are available are for refined metals only.
Okay, thank you. May I request other speakers to please join us on the panel for question answers? Mr. Edward, Mr. Pankaj, if you all can come on. So I have a question for Mr. Nilesh Shah. Sir, please help us out here that what we have learned is all the money which is flowing through FDIs in financial market or in a commodity market is the money which was from the bailout packages. The current valuation seems that it is not giving a clear picture. What and how do you predict that once this money will flow back, what will be the effect on the metals market?
So one, metals market is function of two things, demand and supply, and second, financial participation. If you have money but no demand and supply, prices cannot remain high for long. eventually money power comes to an end and fundamentals prevail. Now in metals market, China is a big component. Their consumption of steel, aluminium, copper, lead is far more than many other players combined in the global market.
Yeah.
So one, you have to always watch China. And China is like a chess player. If they want to buy, they will first sell. If they want to sell, they'll first buy. The data around their stockpiling, selling, demand will all be manipulated. So you have to cut through the noise to figure out what China is up to. The second is the global growth. In a rising global growth, metal demand will get uplifted. Falling growth, metal demand will get impacted adversely. And the third is the financial participation. Clearly, we have seen, for example, right now in gold, that the consumer demand has come down, but the financial investment demand has gone up, and which is where gold prices are supported. So at all point of time, you have to develop your view around these three factors: financials investment, China demand supply, and global growth. That will roughly give you idea about what will happen to metal prices. It's too complicated. So I have a very simple thumb of the rule approach on metals, which has worked well. You take a long-term cycle of metal prices in dollar terms, steel, copper, lead, whatever it is. Divide that in three parts. First 1/3 at the bottom, where metal has become cheaper. The 1/3 at the top, where metal is expensive, and one which is neutral. If metal prices are in top 1/3 position, then you need to be aware that at some point of time metal prices will come down, as more and more defunct capacity at that prices will come into play. If metal prices are in the lower 1/3 portion, then metal prices have become cheaper, and it's going to turn around as more and more capacities will be shut at that cost of production. If you follow this thumb rule, by and large, you will be able to figure out when metal is cheap, when metal is expensive, when metal is neutral.
Okay. With this, sir, since you were talking about China, I just want to understand, with this COVID situation, do you really think that world business and economy will really see China separated from China?
So undoubtedly, the world is going to see serious competition between US and China. One is number one, trying to remain number one. One is number two, trying to challenge it. And for years, US allowed billions of dollars of trade deficit with China. It allowed flow of money to China. It allowed technology copying by China. But now, Wuhan virus or COVID-19 virus has really alerted everyone.
Yeah.
Clearly, world today is suspicious of China. Yeah. It's not that people will completely delink from China, but certainly they will treat them with much more caution. And to a great extent, we see Quad emerging between US, India, Japan, and Australia, which will come together to contain China. So we just have to play our cards well. बचपन में कहानी सुनी थी कि एक बिल्ली थी और दो बंदर थे. दो बंदर रोटी के लिए झगड़ रहे थे और बिल्ली पूरी रोटी खा गई. So for the first time in our history, we need to be selfish. We need to act like that बिल्ली जो दोनों बंदर से रोटी खा जाए.
That's very nice, sir. I have one more question which has come from the audience, and they are asking, what is your view on dollar and rupee term in next 2 quarters? How do you see? Yeah.
So on the rupee side, you have to always watch RBI.
Okay.
RBI has a very good policy that they will not intervene in the direction of rupee. if market को rupee appreciate कर रहा है ना appreciate कर रहा है, नीचे लेके जाना है नीचे लेके जाओ, they will not intervene for direction, but they will ensure that the daily volatility is always contained. Now, destiny of rupee is to depreciate because our inflation is 4-5%.
Yeah.
Global inflation is 1 or 2%. So when inflation differential is ranging between 2 to 3% a year, by definition, rupee has to depreciate 2 to 3% a year. More importantly, our productivity or our efficiency is also a little lower than the rest of the world. So in your calculation from here onwards, please factor in between 2 to 4% depreciation every year. Now, does that mean that in next 2 quarters we will see it? Obviously no, because when you are taking a longer term call, inflation differential works, but quarterly call, it's extremely difficult to guess. When in March 2020, crisis had erupted and FPIs were withdrawing money, everyone thought rupee will depreciate and it was 76, 77. Now Reliance went in and raised 100,000 crore plus in FX market, rupee has moved up. So flows will determine what happens in next quarter or quarter after that no one can predict. As of today, our view is that rupee is likely to remain between 74 to 77 from here till March 21. Now, can it go to 77 next quarter? Possibly. Can it go to 74 next quarter? Possibly. That will be purely based on flow.
My last question to you. There are many people in our attendee list who are not into business, who are into the into share markets, or who are investors in mutual funds. I just want to understand, this is the last question, and this is what we see you as the best presenter for this. How do you see share markets performing in next 2 years, or maybe after the US elections?
So one, let's look at India.
Yeah.
Today we are roughly about 2.7, $2.8 trillion GDP. And our market cap is roughly about 1.5 trillion, give and take something here or there. Now, can India become, let's say, $5 trillion GDP as envisaged by the Prime Minister? Before COVID-19, very few people were doubting it. Post COVID-19, many people are doubting it, that now the run rate has increased too much.
Yeah.
But let me give you just one example which shows what enormous opportunity India has. The World Gold Council believes that Indians are sitting on 25,000 tons of gold. Our assumption is that it is understatement, because they don't know what is gold smuggling. They don't know how many people come back to India wearing gold jewelry in Middle Eastern flights.
Yes.
Now, this money is a waste from India. Our savings go into gold. They neither give interest nor give dividend. Yes, they have increased in value tremendously, so it's not a bad investment, but it is not creating economy. Now, through some magic, if we can monetize this gold, about, let's say, half of what we have, and rounded off, let's assume we had $2 trillion of gold, we monetize 1 trillion. Now, this $1 trillion monetization of gold over a period of time, can it create $2 trillion economy? Quite likely. Suddenly, your $2.8 trillion economy through this one step becomes $4.8 trillion. Now, no one will say 5 trillion is not possible, because it will happen on its own momentum.
Yeah.
So somewhere we need to exploit our advantage. The second one Pankaj talked about is China. In 1980, India and China were of similar size. Today they are 5 times bigger. Why? Because they are manufacturing from safety pin to spaceship and selling it to everyone. Can we bring companies from China to India? Can we help them set up like we allowed, companies to set up in India? Now, if we can achieve that, Can India's growth go up? Answer is yes. Let me give you an example. Samsung came to India long back. It went to Vietnam much after coming to India. In Samsung's GDP, 28% GDP is contributed. In Vietnam's GDP, 28% is contributed by Samsung. Their turnover in Vietnam is $62 billion. In India, it is $12 billion. In India's GDP, Samsung is a very small contributor. Now, can you imagine if India starts nurturing Samsung like Vietnam did? 20 Samsung kind of companies coming to India could result into probably $1.2 trillion GDP.
Yeah.
Now, again, you bring such kind of companies to India, your growth will happen. Now, if GDP growth happens, will market go up? Answer is yes.
Yes.
When we invested in Infosys or Wipro or HCL Tech, they were all companies having hundreds of employees, thousands of employees, having turnovers in crores and profits in lakhs. At that point of time, no one thought that these people will become billion-dollar corporations. But entrepreneurs exploited opportunity which was given to them, or exploitation is not the right word. Entrepreneurs harnessed opportunities available to them and they created billion-dollar companies. So my feeling is that forget 2 years, think of next 20 years, 30 years. Stock markets will do well if all of us as businesses do well.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, sir, for clearing our thoughts. My next question is to Mr. Pankaj Tibrewal. Pankaj-ji, can you just put some light on, see what is happening right now is entire service sector, whether it is hospitality, aviation, or you can say event management space. I'll say entire service sector is badly impacted due to this coronavirus. There is a huge amount of job losses and and huge amount of losses being booked by the entrepreneurs who are in this business. Somehow, this is going to impact the consumption pattern of the people who are involved in this sector. How do you see in next 1 year the consumption of automobiles, white goods, and other stuff which these sector people specifically use a lot? What will be its overall impact to this industry?
A very good question. I think clearly the sectors which you have mentioned have been severely impacted. We have seen job losses, salary cuts, and maybe some of the sectors may take not even 6 to 12 months, but maybe 2 to 3 years to come back to the pre-COVID levels. For example, the global aviation industry is talking about not before 2022-23, we come back to the pre-COVID levels. So clearly you would see the sectors under pain and stress for some time, and people who are employed in these sectors probably would be impacted. But I think the way to look at India is into 3 parts. The first one is the 2% of the Indian households which are actually driving consumption, which is 50-60% of India's consumption. The rest is the middle belly, which is 18% of India, which probably is an important portion. They have transformed themselves from the lower of the pyramid to the 18%, and below is the 80%, which is sub-Saharan kind of per capita GDP numbers. If you look at the top end, probably which drives consumption has not been impacted to that extent which we all think about. And really this time the bottom of the pyramid has been impacted, which may be the daily wage earners, which may be the rickshawala, the iron wala, the dhobi wala, and the middle of the pyramid in some sectors which you mentioned have probably been impacted. But many sectors which probably are seeing very strong demand growth. One is the white goods sector, which you spoke about, and in that our channel checks suggest that the kind of demand we have seen in electronics is unimaginable. And similar trends we saw in China when they started coming to the pre-COVID levels. Because in India, let's accept the fact that homes are not automated to the extent one would have expected. Everybody expects the maid to come in the morning, do the household work. But when for 4-5 months the lockdown happened, you would be surprised to know the number of dishwashers we used to sell in a year, we are selling in a month in India. And that's a category which was completely underpenetrated. In urban cities has started seeing that. Similarly is the case in washing machines. Similarly is the case in refrigerators, that people need to store more. So they have moved from single storage to frost free and large capacity refrigerators. So I think consumer durable industry by and large is doing decently well. Obviously there was a lot of pent up demand. Laptops are in short supply, televisions are in short supply. So I think that ecosystem probably, yes, certain section of people have got impacted, but large number of households which are driving consumption, which is the 2%, probably have not got impacted that much. The second sector you spoke about, automobiles. Let's divide automobiles into 4 parts. The first one is the tractor. I think you have seen huge increase in tractor demand, and registrations are up 37% in the month of July because rural is doing well. Next come two-wheeler. We are seeing very strong demand momentum in two-wheeler also as personal mobility takes over, and everywhere people are encouraging employees not to use public transport but to have a two-wheeler kind of a mode. And many companies have introduced EMI schemes where they are saying that if the cost of the bike is 40,000, the company will fund 20,000 on your behalf, and the rest 20,000 you pay over a 4-year EMI period. So it becomes affordable for employees also, and we are seeing or hearing very good traction on two-wheelers. On the four-wheelers, we are hearing that the schedule for Maruti going into the festive season is quite strong. They did about 1 lakh kind of a volume in July, and from July till maybe November, December, they have a schedule to ramp it up to 150, 160. And we are seeing decent demand at the entry level, but not the high-end level cars, which is probably subdued. The worst impacted right now is the commercial vehicles. I think month on month, we have not seen huge improvement there. Yes, there is some improvement, but still the pre-COVID levels, we are 40 to 45% below in terms of volumes. What we used to see in January, February, we are seeing 40-50% volumes lower. So I think commercial vehicle will be the last to recover because it is directly linked to the overall economy. But on the overall basket, I think the clear sufferers or the clear sectors which will see some demand trend change is apparels, for example. We are hearing on the women side discretionary that as women are not stepping out, the handbags is the worst impacted. The footwear industry of the women's side is very much impacted because if you're not socializing, whom you have to show off, Exactly. So your handbags, your footwear, your apparels, your formal apparels on the men's side, because work from home is still there. So I think there are many categories which are temporarily impacted right now. But on the other hand, we are seeing digitalization products seeing very strong demand growth. So the wallet of the consumer is shuffling between, apparel or a holiday, which used to be large consumption items, to maybe a consumer durable or maybe electronics. So I think the wallet probably is moving to different areas of spend and getting changed.
Thank you so much, Pankajji. My last question is to Ms. Priyanka. Ms. Priyanka, one of our members, one of the attendees have asked that what is the cost of hedging? Can you please give your views on this?
The cost of hedging per se, sorry?
Yeah.
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Yeah. See, the cost of hedging per se is, like I said, in this case, what I had assumed was that the spot price and the futures price are the same. There is usually a basis risk. That, of course, is market determined. So that I wouldn't be able to, as in, there is no short amount that I can say. But apart from that, the only cost of hedging, I think, is the brokerage amount that we are charging. Of course, because you would be hedging commodities are more of a leverage sector, a leverage instrument. So while you are hedging with us, because you will take positions on the futures exchange, yes, certain amount of capital is invested in the name of initial margins and M2M. Roughly what we keep as initial margin as such is 4 to 5%, but looking at current volatility, of course, it's volatility based. In most of the base metals currently would be around 7 to 8%, but this is just the margin that is there with us. So on the 7 to 8%, the amount would be cost of capital. Apart from that, like I said, brokerage is the only costing. There is no major cost per se for hedging.
Okay. Got it, Priyanka ji. Thank you so much. Now I would like to welcome Mr. Vikas Agrawal, MD CEO of AIF and PMS Advisor, to give vote of thanks. Vikas ji, we can't hear you. Just a second. Yeah. Vikas ji, you have muted yourself from your side. You are muted. Yeah.
Now?
Yeah, we can hear you now, Vikas ji. Go ahead.
Okay. So thank you so much, Amarji and the entire MRI team. I think you guys are doing a remarkable job as far as recycling the recyclable. So, you know, I would say that it's a great appreciating work. So my compliments to your team. So as we discussed, you know, for me to invite Nilesh ji is one of the fact that if you look at Kotak, is one of the pioneers in asset management business. They have almost 2 decades of track record of managing public money and have been delivering the deliverables very, very consistently. You know, I take this opportunity to thank Nilesh bhai for taking the time out from his busy schedule. I know he's not keeping well since yesterday, but I think as Amitabh Bachchan says, he's Amitabh Bachchan of our industry. The commitment goes on here is, you know, the show must go on. So I would like to thank him, and I also would like to thank Pankaj for coming out on the short notice.
Thank you, Vikas.
Insights with us.
Thank you, Vikas.
Yeah. So any of the member, if they have any question with regards to the portfolio management services of Kotak Mutual Funds, or if they are keen to know more about their mutual funds, etc., they can reach out to Amarji, and Amarji can in turn, you know, speak to me, and we can take this forward.
Thank you so much,
Yeah.
Vikas ji, and we will keep our members informed about this. Thank you very much, Mr. Edward Meyer, Mr. Nilesh Shah, Pankaj ji, and Ms. Priyanka Zaveri for being a speaker at this webinar. Thank you so much, and we look forward for your participation in our future conferences as well as in webinars. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.